Hey guys, this is John. It is my pleasure to present to you a classic game today. We're going to have a look at the game Georg Rotlewi as white versus Akiba Rubinstein as black. And this game is considered to be Rubinstein's Immortal. So in other words, the best game he's ever played. And it's a brilliancy to be sure. And if you've seen this game before, I hope you'll learn something new from it. If you haven't seen this game before, buckle up because you're in for a wild tactical ride. So this game was played in 1907 in the Polish city of Lodz, I believe is the correct pronunciation. And Rotlewi opened with d4, Rubinstein answered with d5, Rotlewi played knight f3, and Rubinstein played e6. You could consider this move to be slightly inflexible. Black does block in the bishop. They reinforce the center, however. My preference would be for knight f6, as it seems that most strong players do these days. Because notice that white has not played c4, the queen's gambit, yet, so there is no pressure on black's center. But nonetheless, e6 completely playable. And Rotlewi answers in kind. He plays e3. Rubinstein plays c5. And white replies with c4. So already, only a few moves into the game, we have this tension in the center. And when you see these four pawns, particularly on these particular squares, c4, d4, and c5, d5, oftentimes, neither player wants to be the first one to break the tension. So keep that in mind as we go on. So here, Rubinstein played knight to c6, Rotlewi answered knight to c3, and Rubinstein completed the symmetrical picture with knight f6. So here, Rotlewi was the first one to blink. He played d takes c5. And you'll see throughout the opening that Rotlewi makes a few inaccuracies. He plays second or third rate moves on a number of occasions, and Rubinstein is able to seize the initiative as a result. So here, for instance, by virtue of white taking away from the center, not only will black temporarily have one extra central pawn, but Rubinstein is also able to develop his bishop immediately to c5 without having to take a pit stop at, say, e7 or d6. So bishop takes c5, Rotlewi played a3, indicating his desire to play b4, and expand on the queen side. Rubinstein answers with a6. And now after b4, you would have expected Rubinstein to play bishop back to a7. That seems to be the purpose of the a6 move, but he actually played bishop d6 here. So he decides to keep his bishop more centralized, maybe retaining play with the bishop on either of these diagonals, as opposed to just the a7, g1 diagonal. Now here, note that white cannot in fact win a pawn, because if he decides to grab on d5, and we get this series of exchanges with white's queen coming out to d5, what could black play in reply at this stage? If you'd like to pause your video and figure that out, you could do so now. Okay, so this should be a fairly straightforward tactic for many of you. Black can play bishop takes b4 check. A rude awakening for white. They have to respond to the attack on the king, and after a takes b4, black just swipes the queen, queen takes d5, game over. So that's a typical tactical idea, even though it appears that the bishop on d6 is blocking black's queen from being able to support the d5 pawn. The discovery, the fact that that discovery exists, means that this pawn is in fact defended. So after bishop to d6, Rotlewi just played a developing move, bishop b2, and Rubinstein castled. So far so normal. There's been a couple exchanges in the center, but nothing particularly out of the ordinary. Again though, Rotlewi continues making a couple second-rate moves. I'd say up to this point maybe his only second-rate move was d takes c5, but here's where the inaccuracies really start to tell. So he plays queen to d2. And I think this is an inaccuracy because the queen is not necessarily destined for the d2 square. It could very well turn out that this is not an optimal position for the queen. And I like what Karl Schlechter recommended when he analyzed this game later. He said white should just take on d5. And after e takes d5 in reply, note that again, white cannot take here for the same reason, same tactical reason. Instead, Schlechter said white should just play bishop e2, getting ready to castle. Black has an IQP, an isolated queen's pawn, and I'd say this position is about equal. So that's an option white had to kind of calm the struggle and just get ready for short castling. So after queen d2, Rubinstein decides to play aggressively. Rubinstein was actually an endgame virtuoso. That was one of his best characteristics, playing the endgame well. If you ever want to study rook endgames, he's the guy to have a look at his games, because he played some incredibly instructive rook endgames. But he could also whip up a mean attack if he wanted. And queen e7 signals his aggressive intentions. So now black is offering a pure pawn sacrifice. It was not a pawn sacrifice before for the reason we discussed with bishop takes b4 check, but now when the queen leaves the d-file, he's saying, go ahead and take d5, I don't really care, Rotlewi. Go ahead and do your worst. So if this continuation occurred, black taking on d5, white recapturing with the queen, so the center has been liquidated, but white has lost some time picking up this pawn. I believe Rubinstein's intention was to play rook d8 and set up bishop takes b4 once again. White's queen would probably have to flee the d-file, and black is almost entirely coordinated. All they have to do is get the light square bishop into the game, and I think black has full compensation here. So I can't blame Rotlewi one bit for not wanting to go down that line. That looks pretty dangerous. So instead of taking the bait, he decides to play bishop d3, developing once again. Probably he should have gone back to Schlechter's idea, though, and traded on d5 once and then played bishop e2, so not biting a second time. Because after bishop d3, Rubinstein takes on c4, so grabbing the pawn, forcing white to recapture. And unlike black's bishop, which was able to develop to c5 right away, white had to take 2 moves to get to c4. So you can see that white is falling behind in development a little bit. Rubinstein plays b5, attacking the bishop again. White plays bishop to d3. And now rook to d8. So aligning the rook on the d-file with the bishop and also the queen. Rotlewi, in making his next move, kind of admits that queen d2 was a misadventure to begin with. So he plays queen e2, just sidestepping any problems down the file. But now after bishop b7 and castles, if we look at the position, we notice it's almost entirely symmetric. Black has 2 extra moves. They've played rook fd8 already, and it's black's move. So throughout all of that, Rubinstein managed to gather a couple extra tempi, which he now puts to good use. You can see that black's bishops, and in fact white's bishops too, are pointed at the enemy king. So this bishop on d6 aimed at the h2 pawn, this bishop on b7 also occupying a very useful diagonal, but it's blocked by the knight. And when you're ahead a couple tempi in development, you can often get the jump on your opponent in the attacking department, and that's exactly what Rubinstein did here. He played knight to e5, so opening his light square bishop. Rotlewi answers with knight takes e5, and we get a swap on this square. And I think white maybe should have played a modest move here, like rook fd1 in my mind makes a lot of sense. Perhaps looking to swap some pieces down the d-file later. But Rotlewi couldn't help himself, and he plays f4, so trying to kick back this bishop. But even though he's blocking this diagonal for now, he is weakening some squares, like this pawn on e3 becomes a bit weaker. It has no pawn defender. So Rubinstein just retreats his bishop back to c7. And once again, I feel like white should play something like rook fd1, maybe rook ac1. A rook move to the center looks entirely sensible, but he keeps pushing. He goes e4. And dare I say that Rotlewi got a little eager here and overly optimistic about his chances. So e4. Rubinstein plays rook ac8, bringing his rook into the equation. That was the only piece that wasn't participating yet, so good move there, I think. And now, I think after this next move, Rotlewi's position is beyond hope. And it's funny to say that because his next move looks entirely natural. It looks like a continuation of what he set out to do by pushing his f and e pawns. But it just creates way too many problems for white, and black's pieces are going to flood the white position after this. So Rotlewi plays e5. I mean, what could be more natural, right? You advance in the center, you grab more space, you're attacking one of your opponent's pieces. But boy, did he not realize the storm awaiting him after e5. So here, Rubinstein gives a check on b6. I like how these bishops are arranged on complementary diagonals. So white must play king h1. He's not going to be throwing anything in the way. He's only got major pieces that could interpose, so that would be bad. And now, after king h1, I haven't asked you guys a question for a little while. Black to move. What do you think is the best way for black to ignite the attack here? I've already hinted that black is about to unleash some nice attacking ideas. So if you want to pause your video and try to find black's next move, you can do so now. Okay, so Rubinstein, seeing that his knight was under attack, decided to play knight to g4. So putting his knight on an attack square. So not knight d5 or knight d7, some normal looking move like that. No, knight g4. And I'm always astounded in looking at the games of older masters. You know, like on this channel, not long ago I analyzed Paul Morphy's famous Opera House game. But it just seems like a lot of these older players in particular, they had this really great and innate sense of the initiative. Like they kind of just knew when a position was trending in their favor, and often they were just able to strike at the right moment and take advantage. And knight g4 is exactly that type of move. So first things first, if white takes the knight on g4, black's point is that he can play rook takes d3 in reply. And now black has two bishops, one of which is entirely unopposed, this light square bishop. We've just eliminated white's light square bishop, so this is not good at all. There's an attack on the c3 knight, a double attack, both rooks pointed there, and black has this idea of rook d2, attacking the bishop on b2 and the pawn on g2. So that's unplayable for white. White would just go down in flames after that move. In fairness, there's a lot of unplayable moves that white can try here. But taking on g4, rook takes d3 is very clear. If white tries to grab a pawn, so play bishop takes h7 check first, prior to taking on g4, well, he meets a similar fate. Here black can play rook d2, so invading on the second rank. Even though black's king is slightly exposed, the double attack is far more important on b2 and g2. White's just going to get killed here. So that knight on g4 is untouchable for all intents and purposes. So white tried to tolerate its existence on g4, and Rotlewi plays bishop e4. One can almost sense his regret in having thrust his f and e pawns forward, and now he's trying to go into damage control mode. He's like, will you swap bishops with me and maybe get rid of one of your attackers? Pretty please. But, of course, Rubinstein has other plans. So Rubinstein brings in the queen now. Queen h4. Clear threat, queen takes h2 checkmate. And now we can analyze the limited amount of replies white has to this threat. White's pretty much boiled down to either g3 or h3, so moving the h-pawn or the g-pawn. And in the game he played g3, we'll analyze that move in a second, but if h3 is played, take a moment if you want to try to calculate how black should proceed here, because the variation that Rubinstein had in mind against h3 I think is very nice, and it's worth your time to work out. So black to move, how should black play? Okay, so black has a neat tactical win here, and it starts with rook takes c3. Removing this knight is central to black's attacking plans here, and after rook takes c3, bishop takes c3, black can snatch on e4, so bishop takes e4. Now, one of the issues here for white is that if they take on e4, so simply recapturing, then black has this nice mating idea, which is also well worth your study time to commit to memory, queen g3. So black is temporarily down some material, but queen g3 threatens mate on h2, and the only way to parry that is h takes g4, and then black just backs up the queen. Queen h4, checkmate. Notice the role this bishop has on b6 controlling g1. In fact, this is, I think, black's MVP piece in this game. So if we were to proceed down that line, rook takes c3, bishop takes c3, and then black taking on e4, that queen takes e4 move is unplayable. Instead, white could try this move, queen takes g4, trying to remove the knight. But then after queen takes queen, h takes g4 in reply, black has this nice strike at the very end of the line. So rook to d3, hitting the bishop on c3 and also threatening the very sneaky rook h3 checkmate. And those are two very big threats, especially rook h3 checkmate. Probably white's only good way to avoid that is king h2. But after rook takes c3, this is a technical win for black with the two bishops. I don't think black would have too much trouble from here. So all these lines are working out in black's favor, and that's often what will happen when you're attacking and you have the momentum in the position. It's like threats just lead to other threats, and you can almost see one side gathering steam, and the tactics just rolling in their favor. You know, famous chess saying, tactics flow from a superior position. I've always liked that saying. So that's how h3 is refuted. Black would play that lovely rook takes c3 move. So instead, Rotlewi decided to play g3, trying to have the queen participate in the defense of h2. Undeniably, white weakens this diagonal, however. So after g3, we reach another critical moment. Black to move. The queen is under attack, but we have a wide range of moves to consider. And if you also would like to take a moment to consider what black should do, pause your video, figure out how Rubinstein played. Okay, here is where the tactics begin to cascade. So, just like the line prior, rook takes c3 is a very important attacking device, and this was played by Rubinstein. So, removing the knight on c3, which is in turn helping to defend the bishop. And leaving the queen on pre. So, black saying, go ahead, take the queen. Now, we'll look at g takes h4 in a minute, because that was played in the game. But let's say white were to respond with simply bishop takes c3. Then black can play bishop takes e4, check. And if white replies with queen takes e4, practically forced, then queen takes h2 is checkmate. So you can see that removing that knight on c3 led to an overloading situation for the white queen. It was trying to defend e4 while also staving off mate on h2. Not going to cut it when Rubinstein has that many pieces flying against your king and other pieces. So, rook takes c3 pretty much requires white to capture the queen. And I know the position looks very complicated, but there's just not a whole lot else at white's disposal because white was banking on gaining time by pushing back the queen. So g takes h4. And I know I asked you just a moment ago what to do for black, but I'm going to ask you to pause your video again. And if you saw rook takes c3 and you already have your continuation, your follow-up in mind, good job. But for those of you who don't, take a minute and try to figure out what Rubinstein did here upon losing his queen. Okay, so this next move is basically harmony on the chessboard embodied. It's a gorgeous move. If I played a move like this, I'd be bragging about it for the rest of my chess career, probably showing this game to every chess player I come across. And Rubinstein got to play it. So he played rook to d2, bringing the rook into the action. Not even recapturing a piece. He's not even worried about material. You know, you might expect him to play something forcing. I don't know, like bishop takes e4 check, or maybe knight f2 check. But no, he plays rook to d2. And now, there's so many threats that black has here. Most notably, the threat on the queen. And so much inertia black has gathered in the position that white is just unable to cope. So, as I said, the main threat is rook takes e2. Actually, I should rephrase that. Possibly an even greater threat is bishop takes e4, so just imagining that black gets a free move. Queen takes e4 in reply, and now the rook can flex its muscles on the second rank and play rook takes h2 checkmate. supported by the knight. And notice once again this bishop eyeing that g1 square. It's like a lone sentry, just making sure that the white king can never escape to the g1 point. So rook d2 adding more fuel to the fire. And not much white can do. So Rotlewi played probably the only decent move left. Queen takes d2, just removing the offending rook. But now after bishop takes e4 check, white must block with the queen. You could try to block with a rook, but after bishop takes f3, he would be giving up way too much material. He'd have to block with the queen again. After the capture, black even has rook c2, just winning everything. So he must block with the queen right here. And black was able to put the finishing touches on this game with his next lovely move. And I'll ask you to pause the video one more time if you'd like to figure it out. Black to move and win. Okay, so Rubinstein capped this game with rook to h3, calmly sliding the rook over. Again, he's not worried about material. You know, many people would be thinking about getting their material back and taking the queen and then maybe continuing check or something, or knight e3. But no, rook h3. And the threat is rook takes h2 checkmate. And it turns out white doesn't have a convenient response to that. The g1 square covered by the bishop. Yes, white could take the bishop on e4, but rook takes h2 is still mate. We can't remove the knight on g4 because that would be illegal. White's queen is pinned. So Rotlewi found nothing better than to resign at this point. I think there's a couple, he could like throw, I guess he could throw the rook in the way maybe, rook f3. But after bishop takes f3, it's just the same story. So an amazing finale to this game. This combination, rook takes c3 followed by rook d2, sacrificing the queen on h4, has gone down in chess history. I know many of you out there have probably seen this game, but still just such a joy to play through this one. And interestingly, in 2013, there was a game that was stylistically similar to this, played between Levan Aronian and Vishy Anand at the Tata Steel tournament. And I'll link you guys to that one in the comments to this video, because that's also worth playing through. When Anand won that game as black, it was immediately compared to this Rotlewi versus Rubinstein game from over 100 years ago. So very cool. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this game. Go check out Rubinstein's games. He was a great player. I feel kind of bad for the guy. As I was saying, World War I kind of derailed his chess career. But I'm really glad he produced this game and all of his other games too, because he's always a wonderful guy to play through his games and follow. So let me know what you guys think about this one. Thank you for any likes and shares. And let me know if you have any questions in the comments. Talk to you guys later. Bye.